Oh my gosh, it is that time again. It is time for another game of Shelve It or Shove It, the completely superficial way to pick books for your TBR based solely on their covers. I am your host, the booktube goddess, the #1 drag queen booktuber on YouTube. And I will be looking at young adult, science fiction, and fantasy, and picking at least one of those books to add to my TBR for March. So let's go ahead and get started. First up in young adult is She Is a Haunting by Trang Than Tran. This is a very disturbing cover. It is ugly. You can't say anything else, but it's ugly. There's this woman and there's things coming out of her mouth. It looks like flowers. I find this cover disturbing, but I think this is supposed to be a horror novel. Haunting and this cover, come on. So I'm kind of intrigued that it's a horror. It's very bold that the cover is so disturbing, and I'm not sure about the plot. I mean, haunting, I assume it's a ghost story. This woman with flowers coming out of her mouth and leaves around her. I think I'm going to have to shove it. Next up is Immortality, a love story by Dana Schwartz. I think this is kind of cool. I mean, obviously it looks like a brain, but the brain is a woman sitting and her dress is making all the folds in the brain. So I think that's clever. Is it clever enough for me to get it? I'm not really interested in young adult love stories, so that's something. I'm assuming this is going to be another twist on the vampire novel. Interesting cover, but I'm afraid I'm going to have to shove it. Next up is These Infinite Threads by Tahira Mafi. And right away it says it's a sequel to The Woven Kingdom, which I have not read. And I'm assuming this is supposed to be a tapestry or some type of cloth because it says threads in the title. Has a very interesting knife, and there is a floral pattern on the knife, and there's flowers coming off it, which is a trend in 2023 if you haven't seen my trend video. I think the typography is kind of covering up the artwork, which I am more interested in. Just on the basis this is a sequel that I haven't read the first book, I'm going to go ahead and shove it. Next up is This Time It's Real by Anne Lang. Not the type of book I would be interested in at all. I do think the colors are appealing, sort of those pastel colors. I do think the illustration is a little too cartoony for me. This is definitely not the type of book I would go for, so I'm going to have to shove it. Next up is Delicious Monsters by Lizelle Sambury. Now, I'm aware of this author. I haven't read anything by them yet, but I am aware because this is a YouTuber or an author tuber that often discusses her writing process, which I think is interesting. And by the way, I think this cover is really interesting. I am getting horror vibes from it. There's a woman sort of laying halfway in water. Part of her is photorealistic, but her hand is a tree. And then in the water, it's getting very zombified. So I want to read something by Lizelle Sambury. I like this cover a lot. I'm not crazy that it's young adult horror, but you know I've been searching for a good new horror author, so I think I'm going to shelve it. Now we move on to science fiction, and first up is Arch Conspirator by Veronica Roth. Doomed from the start, all of us is the tagline, and I am liking this cover. It kind of borders between abstract and realistic. It's a little cartoony, but it reminds me of the Twilight Zone, this woman walking on this bridge, this expanse of this mountain I don't know what this is, but it looks intriguing. And why is the name Veronica Roth ringing bells? I believe... Okay, she wrote the Divergent series, which I didn't read, but I'm aware of her name. I hope this is a standalone. It's probably going to be another dystopian, but I am really intrigued by this artwork. I'm going to have to shelve it. Next up is Users by Colin Winnett. I don't like this cover at all. I guess from the name Users, we can kind of guess it's about social media users, or maybe it's computer game users, or something with the internet. But this cover gives me nothing, absolutely nothing. Maybe it's a doorway, maybe it's not. Going to have to shove it. Next up is Meru by S.B. Divya. And I kind of like this artwork. There's this cavern or something, and there's a figure at the bottom, and there's an ocean. This is science fiction, so maybe this is another planet. I like the colors. I'm just not quite sure what type of science fiction this could be about. Meru is the name of a planet, a person, something. There's no taglines. You know, as much as I like the artwork, I'm just not feeling what this story could be about. So I'm going to have to shove it. Next up is The Sham Shine Blind by Paz Pardo. How many science fiction books have we seen lately where the Golden Gate Bridge is somewhere on the cover? I'm not really sure why this is a thing. I do see there is more going on than the last Golden Gate Bridge we saw. It looks like a paint by number illustration, which is kind of interesting. And it looks like there is one of those chalk outline bodies on the ground, and there's a woman. I'm sure this is some type of science fiction mystery. And it's in San Francisco, you think Silicon Valley, so computers are involved, the internet is involved. I'm not that mad at this cover. At first I was just like, another Golden Gate Bridge, but the more I'm looking, the more interesting aspects there are on this. I am kind of wondering what this ANDVEL means, because that's sort of the key code for the colors you're supposed to use, which doesn't make sense because 6 and 5 are orange and blue, and that's what they're painting the bridge at. So I'd be curious if anyone actually does this paint by numbers. Anyway, I'm on the fence. Oh my gosh, I'm on the fence on this one. I'm not being really drawn into it. I think I'm going to have to shove it. Next up is Cold People by Tim Rob Smith. Best-selling author of Child 44. Haven't read that, not familiar with this author. The image on the cover is a cold person. Looks like someone frozen in ice. We know this is science fiction, so cryogenics maybe, or an ice planet. I don't know. It's not really speaking to me. I'm going to have to shove it. Now we move on to fantasy. And first up is Genko, a novel by Cherie Demoline, author of Empire of Wild and the Mirror of Thieves. I don't know any of this. I don't know the author. And I think this is kind of a cool cover because it says Venco, but then it runs it together as Coven. And there are these parakeets. So the birds are kind of throwing me off. Assuming this is a witchcraft, fantasy, contemporary, something. I don't know. This isn't giving me enough. I'm going to have to shove it. Next up is The Last Tale of the Flower Bride by Roshani Chokshi. I am more familiar with this author as a middle grade writer, so seeing an adult fantasy book is interesting. The cover itself is pretty. And since it says Flower Bride, I'm not going to assume these flowers are part of the cover trend of putting flowers on the cover. So I like it, but I don't love it. I'm not quite sure what we're going to get with this one. So I'm going to have to shove it. Next up is Victory City by Salman Rushdie. Now, I think most of us know who Salman Rushdie is, and I have never read anything by them. And we also know that he just lost an eye because of some extremists that attacked him while he was giving a speech. I kind of want to just read it just because this is such a famous author. I feel like I ought to read something by Salman Rushdie. The cover itself is kind of simple. There is this sort of, I'm guessing maybe desert, Mideast buildings, kind of looking ancient. I'm not crazy about the color scheme. I'm not crazy about these tans. I wish they would use more colors that would pop. But darn it, just because it's Salman Rushdie and I want to read something by them, I'm going to go ahead and shelve it. Next up is Stone Blind by Natalie Haynes. And this is going to be something to do with the Medusa, another Medusa retelling. It's actually not that attractive of a cover in my opinion because the colors are just weird, sort of that dull turquoise. And I don't need another retelling of a Greek myth. We've had so many of those. I'm going to have to go ahead and shove it. And the final book in fantasy and the final cover we're going to look at is A Day of Fallen Night by Samantha Shannon, author of Priory of the Orange Tree. I did not like Priory of the Orange Tree. Don't kill me. Don't kill me. I know a lot of you loved Priory. I just felt there wasn't much new ground to it, and it just felt to go on forever, and I didn't really even like the characters to relate to them. So for me, it wasn't a book for me. I love this illustration of the dragon, and I like the colors. Actually, I like this cover. Let's just say I like this cover. I am not crazy about this author, and I am wondering if this is a sequel to Priory, in which case I really don't want to read it. And can I just say real quick, the typography to me is really hard to read against this very colorful, busy background. I wish they would have done something to punch the title out more, but that's just me. But overall, because I didn't like the author's last book, and I'm not sure if it's a sequel to that book, I'm going to have to shove it. Okay, it looks like we have one young adult, one science fiction, one fantasy, Delicious Monsters by Liselle Sambury, Veronica Ross, Arch Conspirator, and Salman Rushdie's Victory City. What a choice. I'm I'm going to say no to the Veronica Roth. If this is another dystopian, I'm just not in the mood for a dystopian. So that leaves a young adult horror, Delicious Monsters, by an author I've been wanting to read because of her AuthorTube channel. And Salman Rushdie's Victory City. Another author I kind of want to read at least one thing by. Okay, I'm going to surprise everyone, I think, and go with Delicious Monsters by Lizelle Sambury. One, I want to read something by Lizelle Sambury. I've been looking for another horror author, and I'm a little concerned if it's young adult, if there's going to be a lot of young adult romance tropes, which I hope there's not. As for the Salman Rushdie book, this may be a book I'm probably going to read. I don't know if I'll read this month or not, but I kind of want to see some reviews about it. I want to see what people are saying about it, because I'm not even getting what the setting is. Is this a new fantasy realm that he's world built, or if it's set in the ancient past, some sort of historical fantasy? I don't know. Please, if you've read the book or know anything about it, let me know down in the comments. But right now, let's go ahead and look up the blurb for Delicious Monsters. The Haunting of Hill House meets Sadie in this evocative and mind-bending psychological thriller following two teen girls navigating the treacherous past of a mysterious mansion 10 years apart. Daisy sees dead people, something impossible to forget in bustling, ghost-packed Toronto. She usually manages to deal with her unwanted ability, but she's completely unprepared to be dumped by her boyfriend. So, when her mother inherits a secluded mansion in northern Ontario, where she spent her childhood summers, Daisy jumps at the chance to escape. But the house is nothing like Daisy expects, and she begins to realize that her experience with the supernatural might be no match for her mother's secrets, nor what lurks within these walls. A decade later, Brittany is desperate to get out from under the thumb of her abusive mother. A best-selling author who claims her stay at Miracle Mansion allowed her to see the error of her ways, but Brittany knows that's nothing but a sham. She decides the new season of her popular haunted web series will uncover what happened to a young black girl in the mansion 10 years prior and finally expose her mother's lies. But as she gets more wrapped up in the investigation, she'll have to decide if she can only bring one story to light, which one matters most, Daisy's or her own. As Brittany investigates the mansion in the present, Daisy's story runs parallel in the past, both timelines propelling the girls to face the most dangerous monsters of all, those that hide in plain sight. Okay, this is kind of getting me concerned because I'm thinking of Our Crooked Hearts, a novel that I just thought was okay, and a lot of the premises seem similar. I do know that Lizelle Sambury does live in Canada, so this is a Canadian ghost story by a Canadian author. I am kind of intrigued that there's this 10-year jump in perspectives, so I'm assuming the main character starts when she's 6 or 7 years old, then jumps to when she's 16 or 17 because this is a young adult. But if she jumps to when she's in her 20s, then suddenly, why is this being marketed as young adult? Then it sounds like it's an adult horror novel, which I'd be more into, frankly. So we are getting a haunted house story with ghosts and some sort of supernatural twist. We're getting family drama, this thing with the mother. We're getting secrets in the past. I am intrigued. I'm intrigued. What books would you have picked based solely on the cover? Let me know down in the comments. Until we meet again, may all the books you read be blessed.